Ross, good to have you, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. How you doing?
I'm good, man.
Cool.
I'm good.
So, we were talking a little bit before we got started about like what we're doing here, just having conversations about people's beliefs, experiences around drugs, drug use, and kind of everything that comes along with it. So, I guess start. Where are you from?
I'm from Maine originally.
Okay, all right.
Pownell, Maine.
And you say originally you come here from Maine. You come here from.
I just moved back to South Florida from Savannah, but I went to college in Florida. So I went to college in St. Pete. So I came down 18.
Okay. Where? What school did you go to?
Eckerd College.
Cool. What'd you study?
I ended up doing interdisciplinary art, but I studied computer science, psychology, did a bunch of different stuff.
Nice. So you
What
kinda
kind of
ran the
art?
gamut.
Interdisciplinary. Just like
Explain that to me.
So it's combining disciplines with art. Like I combined a lot of like psychology and storytelling. I did my thesis was a long stop motion watercolor animation. I mean, I say long. It was like 4 minutes long, but that's long.
That's
for
long
Yeah.
for stop
one
motion.
person animation.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But you know, I studied a lot of clay. I did circuit bending. I don't know if you guys know circuit bending. It's when you take like a toy that makes sound, like, and you open up the back of it and like add like modulators and volume controls and stuff to the circuit board, so you like turn it into an instrument. You add like a 1/4 inch out, so you can plug it into like an amp, and you have like a custom musical instrument. It's pretty
That's kind of cool.
That's badass. I don't know like half of what you said as far as how going about it, but that sounds fucking dope. So you're a man of many interests and many hats,
Yes, sir.
you would say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So I've known you for a little while now. You mentioned coming back from Savannah. I knew you when you were down here before going to Savannah. Coming from Maine to Florida, going to college in Florida, was your introduction to substances there?
No.
Yeah.
No, I started studying for that in Maine for sure.
Yeah.
Maine was, I'd say, like really like one of the spear points of where the Sacklers hit with the
Yeah, for sure.
pill epidemic.
They definitely
So,
targeted that.
Yeah. The whole Appalachians there was basically like where they targeted, and so yeah, like growing up, I started, like everyone, I started with, cigarettes and alcohol and smoking a little weed, but
What age?
I started smoking and drinking when I was like 11.
Okay.
Pretty young. But when I was 15, I figured out that probably about a third of my friends' parents had, what I now know is basically heroin in their medicine cabinet.
Yeah, right on.
And yeah, that was a turning point for me in a bad way. I really sort of found something that fixed all the rough edges that I had always had that, made me feel complete. And I definitely ran with it.
Okay.
I'm assuming you mean
time.
by medicine cabinet, you're talking about pills, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oxys and stuff like
Oxy
that.
mostly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Rewinding a minute. 11's pretty young.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say. Some people would say, I guess.
Yeah.
What would you say, like, your perception of substances, drugs, drug use was like before that? And I always like to ask, can you recall, like, when the first time, like, the idea of drugs, like, came into your mind or was introduced to you?
Yeah, man. Well, I think in my mind as a kid, definitely at first I saw alcohol differently. My parents did it. They were probably smoking weed too, but at that point I didn't know that. I saw alcohol as something that was like okay and it was all right to do, and I think at first it was more of like I was kind of I like to push the envelope as a kid, and I don't know. I got into the alcohol first, but I set drugs aside at first. I always knew people who were doing drugs, and I don't know. I think that definitely, like, I started out really kind of prejudiced against that. Like those were like the worst kids. Like there were, kids getting in trouble, drinking a little bit, but like, I don't know. Drugs were more serious, and at first I didn't want to get involved with that. And
Okay.
I didn't start smoking pot till I was like 14.
Okay. And was that just like what was happening with your peer group at that point?
Yeah.
Became more acceptable.
Yeah, I remember there were these girls in my class that we all knew they were smoking, but they ended up like getting in trouble for it with the adults and like didn't get in that much trouble. And I think that was the turning point. I'd had people like asking me to go out and smoke with them, but that was where I was like, well, it doesn't seem like that big a deal. And really, I mean, pot probably isn't that big a deal, but
Yeah.
for me, that was where I sort of changed my mind about drugs. Like, this is,
Right.
probably okay.
Were you fed a lot of like the kind of typical stuff about weed back in like the 90s that a lot of kids would get? In terms
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
like-
We had like the DARE
Yeah.
program at our school, which, I would love to go back and like see a video of what that actually looked like, because in my mind I have like the sort of partial memory of it, but it can't be as dumb as I'm remembering it.
It is. It definitely is.
I was about to ask you, Eddie, if you did dare.
Yeah, well, we talked about it last time, and my experience of that was just
Yeah,
singing
right.
these cheesy, cartoony
Yes.
Saturday
Yes.
morning special kind of songs.
Yeah.
And it's as dumb as you remember it.
Yeah.
I just have like a very clear recollection of a lot of like far out stories that I was talking about it in either our last show or while we were setting up. I don't know. That just like from the get seemed like they had to be a lie.
Yeah.
Like the cop that came in saying like this guy on LSD tore out his eyeballs because he thought there were bumblebees around him and he was trying to get him off and stuff like that. I have a lot of memories of like those kind of stories that I was like, there's no way people use drugs like for that effect. So
Yeah.
what's really the deal here?
Absolutely.
But I do recall one thing that I can actually think of that like made sense to me that was like actually fact-based. I was thinking about it in a conversation a couple days ago, was when they were talking about ecstasy, MDMA, and they said a lot of like dumb shit about it too, like like you'd be plastered on the floor in a party hearing colors. Like I remember that because like me and my friends started having this running joke like purple like that, we're fifth graders. But he did like talk about like how with prolonged use, like you get this high, and he drew it on the whiteboard and stuff, and then like you come down and you get down, and then like you do it again and you get high, but you don't get quite as high, and then down is lower. And that, looking back, like makes sense to me in terms of like my experiences with problematic substance use.
Yeah.
I think where the problem lied was it was just like applied across the board to all substances and all substance use. And I know like for me, I found that like when that wasn't true,
Yeah.
like in
Yeah.
one case or another, what else wasn't true kind of deal.
Yeah.
Did you like find something similar with that?
I mean, absolutely. I think I sort of felt the same way when I definitely remember that cartoon songy video, and like, I mean, I don't know, maybe I was just sort of a dark kid, or I just like really wanted to escape, but I like saw it as like, oh, like these are they were like super like friendly characters in like a scary way, but like, oh, they're gonna be my friends, like I'm gonna end up trying this stuff, and I did. But yeah, I mean, I think that scare tactic method definitely leads to. I think that they view kids as simpler than they actually are, and they think like they have to take this scare approach to explaining it. That I mean, I also definitely saw through very quickly, and I think I don't think kids are stupid. I mean, they're inexperienced, but I think you'd have better luck with a more nuanced approach. Or like, look, like these things can be fun sometimes, but if it gets out of control, if you let your life start to revolve around it, it's going to become this unhealthy, insidious thing that can take over your life. But I mean, yeah, I think the scare tactic method, maybe it works on a few people, but it definitely, I mean, it's a pretty epic fail, I think. It's pretty openly recognized at this point that DARE specifically and just that style of approaching kids in general just did not work. And if anything, it probably attracted some people to drugs.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
that was my
raise that
experience.
Curiosity. It's like it'll do what? Prove it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna find out for myself
Yeah.
because I'm a person of science.
Yeah.
At
Drugs
5 years old.
weren't a thought in my mind until DARE. And 6th grade, I was checking out every drug book in the library. You know what I mean? You're good, man. So I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, I love the way that you put, like, kids aren't as simple as, like, they like to try to make them out to be. And I think they do need a more nuanced, you know, conversation. And, like, which I think we've talked about a couple weeks ago, like, the Safety First program that we're working on with RAD, the RAD program, which is like a drug education program designed for high school students. It was designed by the Drug Policy Alliance, and it's pretty much what you were talking about. It's fact-based. It's, you know, obviously abstinence is the safest approach, but, like, you know, people use drugs, and here's the realistic outcomes and ways that it can be gone about more safely, you know.
Well, kids today too are a lot different than when we were growing up. We didn't have social
they have
media
a lot
growing
of
up. We didn't have
information.
Facebook and all that. We didn't have internet. We had dial-up. Remember that?
Yeah.
AOL and all that stuff.
We definitely didn't have phones like this.
Yeah, so definitely kids are a lot more informed. They're a lot smarter today than we were at their age.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way.
They have
Kinda,
access
sorta.
to a lot more
But yeah,
information for
they
sure.
do. And a lot of it is false information. I mean,
That's
we're looking
true,
at
too.
social media and stuff like that. You know, that saying, oh, it's on the internet, it must be true. It's because there's a lot of false information out there as well. So kids have early opinions about things. So the approach, like, is DARE even still a thing?
In some places,
I
I
don't
didn't think
believe
it
it.
was, but someone recently told me that I think it was in one of my classes, someone was talking about either like a sibling or a kid was going through, perhaps it was a different drug education program and they just called it DARE because that's what we know of as the drug education program.
Mm-hmm.
I do know, like, either like 2 years ago, maybe 3, it's hard to determine now, but that there was some media attention out there that DARE removed cannabis, like their cannabis part from their curriculum. That was like a thing. So, you know, I don't know if DARE's stopped since then, but I think it's still happening at some capacity.
It makes sense, though, with it becoming widely available medically.
Right.
And in some places recreationally.
Right.
I mean,
How are you going to tell these kids, like, when their parents are, you know, using it for medicine or for recreation, that, like, it's going to make them rob their moms, you know, like
ever
that.
seen a Reefer Madness? That's
Yeah,
what's going to happen to you.
Yeah, that's some,
Yeah.
some far out shit. So you moved on to weed. You know, you figured out that DARE wasn't, or whatever you were told about drugs, you know, wasn't necessarily true.
Yeah.
How did that progress? And, you know, mentioning, obviously, the Sacklers really targeting Appalachia and Maine. How did that move into your life? And was that a common thread throughout your peer group? Were you alone in that?
Somewhere in between. I I mean, I didn't like jump right from weed to doing oxy. I had, I did cocaine and mushrooms and LSD in between that time. But my peer group, I mean, I'd say by the end of high school, most of my friends, and I was in like the college headed, the people headed to college. I was in that group. Most of them were at least smoking pot.
Yeah.
And then I had some closer friends that were getting in deeper than that with me. Yeah. Oxy was popular. DXM, a lot of us were doing a lot of DXM, robo-tripping.
Well, Coricidin, the triple C's,
No,
or
not
just the syrup?
Just the syrup.
Triple C's were big in my high school.
Yeah, I've never
Done that a few times.
never
Yeah.
done the triple C's, but I've definitely
Fucking gross.
drank some syrup. Yeah, it is yucky.
Body feels
Yeah.
like rubber.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like just an experience, not really a good one. It's
Yeah.
just one.
Yeah, no, stick with ketamine.
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Dissociative wise, I mean, DXM is a dissociative.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
Never tried PCP, but
Yeah.
yeah. I just
Was it
DXM.
available to you? Because PCP is super regional, but I know like it does get around in the Northeast a little bit. Was it a conscious thing not to try it, or you
no,
just
it wasn't
never
a
had
conscious
to?
thing.
Yeah.
But I
Okay.
mean, based on how crazy I got on DXM, I'm glad I never tried PCP.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So was it manageable for a while? Was like, I mean, you went to school, like you were
Yeah.
doing a lot of shit.
I don't know how manageable it was. I think I had this thing happen, I mean, in high school and in college, where just everyone, and I think in retrospect, everyone knew, like the teachers knew too, but that I was getting fucked up all the time. But I was smart enough that like the stuff I was doing school wise was pretty undeniable, and there was no separating me from the drugs. Like I just hadn't had enough consequences, and I wasn't like some of my friends got really into like selling drugs and like doing other criminal shit.
And was
and
this
I just wasn't.
high school, college?
Both.
Okay.
Both. So I had some friends my junior year, they were seniors. They got busted with a ton of brownies, like, a pound a pot worth of brownies, and like a few ounces of coke in the back of their car in the high school parking lot. And oh man, it was such drama. It was such a nightmare, like, because I mean their futures were just automatically just like not shot. I mean, these are, rich white kids. Like, their futures weren't destroyed, but they were definitely like downgraded. Like, the colleges were notified, like, and anyway, like they were having to like roll on people. And I think that was for me. I saw them going through that, and that was just like a boundary I set. Like, and I throughout my use, I had some like minor stints of like selling coke, like a little bit of coke, but
like
I
to support your
never,
habit
it was never attracted to me to be like one of these like wannabe Scarface style.
I
drug
just sell enough to get
dealers.
mine for free.
Yeah.
I think that's a saving grace for me anyway. Like, that kept me out of the really like serious legal consequences that you can have from selling drugs or like being that deeply involved. I never got that. My close friend Jonah repeatedly, I mean, he was a serious drug dealer, but he ended up getting busted a few times, and it just really, I think that he got to a place where he wanted to grow up, but his past wouldn't let him.
Yeah.
And he ended up dying, and I think it was a suicide. I'm not totally sure.
Oh man.
But yeah, I don't know. That's something I always avoided that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's just like we destroy people's lives for over drugs and like give them no chance.
Yeah.
You know, that's our drug policy in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a shame. I'm sorry to hear about that. But it's not an uncommon story.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, what happened as far as like college goes? You get out of college,
Well, I was in college for a
manage.
long time. It took me, I think the total amount of time to get my undergrad was 8 years, but I was in and out of school. So I should say like, so what I had was I got I mean, I earned my place in, I should say. When I was 16, I got in a really nasty car accident that was around doing drugs. I didn't get a DUI. I was too badly hurt. They just took me to the hospital. But that did mess up my neck, and I ended up at the time it was really bad, but I was like, oh, this worked out. Now I can get my own painkillers. And I just really hit the sweet spot, if you want to call it that, of the prescribing time when you could just get prescribed, fentanyl patches and Opana pretty easily. And I was, not in enough pain to be getting those things, but I was manipulative enough, and the injury looked bad enough on an MRI that I was able to, for a long time, just get whatever pills I wanted, which ended up mostly being Dilaudid and Opana.
It's got to be an up north thing, fentanyl patches and Opana. Because when I lived in Ohio, they were pretty big, fentanyl patches and Opana. I'd never seen that down here. Not like
I was
did.
prescribed fentanyl patches for a long time, but I never came across them on the streets.
I've never came across, like in Ohio, it was real easy. And I didn't even know what they were back then, and I got handed a whole box of it. And I'm like, nah, what am I going to do with that? Come to find out there was $75 a pop.
Yeah.
I was kicking myself back then. But, they were...
But you could have killed someone very easily.
Yeah,
you put one of those things
People
on
don't
without
know.
a tolerance and you're dead.
Yeah.
So that must be something from up north, those two things.
Yeah.
I mean, and people don't know, too, like that, like a lot of people would die from that because they would end up like putting it in their mouth.
Yeah.
Like
That's
not,
what I did.
Not realizing,
Like chew on 'em.
probably with a tolerance, because it's like for 72 hours, those patches. So like they might see 100 micrograms and think, oh, there's 100 micrograms in here. But no, it's 11 milligrams because it's 100 micrograms per hour for 72 hours.
Yeah, I knew
And a
nothing
lot of
about them
people
back then. Never even
overdose,
heard of fentanyl then. Never even knew what it was. All I knew was that, hey, it's a painkiller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Times have changed, and fentanyl is very different now than compared to pharmaceutical grade fentanyl.
Yeah.
know. But so what? You were.
I didn't finish explaining my school.
Yeah.
So I got to school, and I mean, I was heavily into drugs, but it was a big party school, and I wouldn't say like my use was at the level where it distanced me from some people, but a lot of people were just down to party, and I kept up with school when I was in it. I would sometimes have to take breaks, but my first year is computer science, and I finished at the top of my class at the curve on the final exam. I transferred to psychology. So at the end of my freshman year of college, I got suspended. I had at this point, having had real overdoses, I wouldn't really even call it an overdose. I was just really messed up. At Kappa Carnival, they called it. They bring all these rides onto campus, and everyone's fucked up. But anyway, I was too fucked up for record. And I got Baker acted for my first time, and spent a few days in the hospital, and ended up getting suspended.
This is all off of opiates?
Yeah, opiates and benzos, yeah.
Okay.
And at the same time, my best friend at the time, Jonah, got expelled for selling coke, or something like that, selling something. And I had been the one selling coke in my dorm, and the guy who took over that for me when I went to the hospital ended up getting caught and expelled too. So I mean, it was bad. But I got suspended for a year. That was my first year I went to rehab. I went to rehab at this place up north, northern New York. I think it was in Hageman, New York. It's called St. Jude. And it was like a anti-12-step rehab, which is pretty, for the time, I think it was pretty forward-thinking. They sort of borrowed some stuff. Like, you write out your life story. They had a lot of therapy. They basically, I mean, they recommended abstinence, but they were okay with moderation. You were allowed to be on subs. I remember that.
Was it like a rational recovery model, or just kind of
something like that? I mean, it was so long ago. But I'm not sure exactly what like specific model they were using, but I think that it was around like SMART recovery. It was like that
That's
sort
what
of
was
thing.
coming to mind as you were speaking.
Yeah.
SMART.
And that was really good. I wish I had dug into that at the time. Drugs just still had such like a romance to them for me back then. Like, I wasn't seeing the dark sides. I was still like, I was still dating. I still had a beautiful girlfriend. I still had a future. And people hadn't started dying yet. Really. Like, I wish I could go back in time and shake myself, but it's not that I didn't see the harm in it, but I was just too wrapped up in it it was like this fun, exciting, dangerous thing I could share with people, and not like now if I was to be doing heroin and share it with someone, I'd say that's like as bad as like, like having unprotected sex when you have like super active AIDS or something like that. Like, it's a bad thing to do, but I didn't see it like that at the time.
Any heroin that you're getting from the street, you're definitely, putting yourself and anybody else at risk.
Yeah.
Not even just heroin. They're putting it in coke and
fake pills.
I have a friend that died from what he thought was Xanax, and it turned out to be fentanyl pressed into what looked like a bar.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of that in Palm Beach County lately. I mean, most of the green bars down here are fentanyl, not Xanax, that you're getting from the street. Yeah, same with the blues. Dirty 30s. Yeah.
Regardless, I mean, fentanyl or no, I mean, the person I am now just like knows better than to think like, oh, this is like a cool lifestyle I can share with someone.
Right.
But,
But would you say part of it, like you mentioned, like, do you think just the taboo nature of it is part of what like romanticized it for you? Like,
the taboo nature of it. I mean, just the feeling I got from it. I think that a lot of it was just before I started doing drugs, I was sort of like not the cool kid. I was like kind of like, I don't know. My family moved around a lot when we were kids. At first, I think by the time I hit 4th grade, it was my third school I'd been. It was after the third move, I guess the second school I'd been in, but it was a really small school, and I was like smart but not super like socially well adjusted, and in retrospect, I started doing drugs probably too early to really finish maturing socially, and I think it really became, I could relate to people intellectually, and I could relate to people with drugs, and like I'm still, even now at 33, I'm still like learning a healthy way to like get in with people socially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think early on, like earlier in my life, I had such a mindset of instant gratification of like, I'm going to meet someone and we're going to either like really click and like be friends really quickly, or I'm going to meet this girl and we're going to have sex and start dating like that day though.
Yeah. Right.
Like, and as you get older, that's just not how it works. But it worked for a long time when I was younger. That was just like how I did things, and I didn't have patience for a more nuanced, healthy lifestyle.
Right.
And
that can be kind of, in a lot of ways, the experience of drugs itself, right? You know,
absolutely.
Like as opposed to like working towards like this really like sustained sense of peace. You know, you can do a shot of heroin and feel really euphoric and peaceful.
Yeah.
You know, so that makes sense.
I think that while I was using, I'd never really experienced any sort of like long-lasting emotional health before I started doing drugs, unfortunately. And it's not like my parents' fault. I was born like, I don't know. I definitely like just sort of, that's one part of AA I do identify with. It's like I was born like missing some piece that other people got. And then when I was doing drugs, it you know, when it was working well, it filled in that gap, and it never occurred to me that like I deserved more than that I could have more than that. And definitely like it took me a long time to see that the drugs were not the answer, and also just like couldn't be a piece of the puzzle if I wanted to achieve that
Right.
long-lasting piece.
Right. How did things change for you when like the pill mills and everything shut down, when they got really cracking down on it?
Eventually, I stopped being able to. I had another overdose on Soma, which is that's a bad thing to overdose on. If you're gonna overdose, do it on opiates.
Yeah, at least there's naloxone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pump your stomach.
Yeah, I woke up intubated. My doctor was really freaked out. My doctor, you know, I wouldn't say she's like really like a pill mill. I think it's more just I'm like really manipulative, and she's like,
right.
And also the drug companies are really manipulative. And, it's not until recently that doctors even understand like what a poison these opiates can be for a lot of people. I don't know like how, like they had to have some idea. Like I wonder how willful the ignorance was before that, but it's definitely not like been stamped into their heads until recently.
Right.
That like.
Right.
You know, until the pill mills shut down. So I guess it's not that recent, but
yeah. I mean, when they're like being given by pharmaceutical reps like all these informational pamphlets and what appear to be legitimate studies, you know, funded by the pharmaceutical company that's, you know, selling it to them, but that's not always that disclosed. And as a medical professional in Western medicine, they're oftentimes trained to like what the FDA puts a stamp on approval of, and what, you know, these studies tell me like this is what it is.
Yeah,
you know,
and what their peers are doing.
Yeah,
And when there's so many doctors prescribing opiates, I think it wasn't. I mean, yes, there were pill mills, but I mean there are lots of doctors that are still practicing that were prescribing way more opiates than they are now.
For sure. Yeah. And, you know, like we talk about sometimes, like it swung the other way, too. Like there's a lot of people who are in legitimate pain that can't get their medication.
Absolutely.
And what happened, you know, what you can talk about. I don't know if this was your experience or not, but for a lot of people, they shut down and then it went to heroin,
Yeah.
which became fentanyl. You know?
That's definitely when my doctor stopped prescribing. It was basically like switched to. Well, I mean, for me, it was go to rehab. My parents kept sending me to rehab, and I didn't have the finances to do something else really, and I just did not. I was coming off these strong ass drugs it was the worst withdrawal. It didn't stop. Like, it wasn't like a week. I think I'd been on them for probably longer and at higher doses than most people. I mean, there was a point where I was prescribed 6 Dilaudid-8s a day and a fentanyl patch and like 10 Perc-10s.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I was on a very similar protocol for a long time.
And that's not to brag. Like,
No,
that's
yeah,
just
that's
like,
that's where you get.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that was normal for me, and I would still like run out sometimes. Like, I generally was good with making my prescription last, but that amount of drugs is not maintainable with street drugs.
Right.
No.
Period.
Right.
So even once I got, I mean, not unless you have like $500 a day to spend, and I definitely didn't. So I would go to treatment, and I mean, they'd be like 30-day treatments. They give me 7 days of detox, but even by the end of the 30 days, I was like just coming out of withdrawal, and I was still just so miserable. If I would make it through, and mostly I would run away. And it started this really dark period of my life where I went from relying on the doctor and, you know, still like somewhat functioning to that was what I knew of how to have peace and be happy, but the only way I could get it was to buy heroin on the street now, and it was never consistent, and I just like never really like I ended up making some friends in that community, but I never like really like was part of that before, so it never really like fully like clicked for me socially. I was really like honestly just used to much like higher quality friendships than you're gonna find doing street drugs.
Yeah.
And it was bad. I went through a long period. I guess I should explain. Around the a little bit after I stopped being prescribed opiates, my partner Melanie, who had been using with me, ended up overdosing and dying. And that totally rocked my world. Emotionally, like I was in this dark place already from, you know, I didn't have the drugs I was used to. I had just graduated from college, and I didn't have a lot of future prospects at that point, just because of the way I'd been living was not going to translate well to the real world. Right. And when she died, it was just like this trifecta of things that were on me that it, you know, I think it's a credit to my parents really that I survived that period. I entered such a dark depression. And you know, it was really more like when I was doing good, I'd be out getting drugs, and I had the energy to go get heroin and stuff. And when I was doing bad, I was just like in bed, depressed. Yeah. It was really dark.
You know, I know I've heard a lot of people say, and I could say this for myself, for me, more so just due to like the physical pain from like the chronic illness I've experienced, but in some ways emotionally, but for a lot of people, especially emotionally, you know, we might say that if it weren't for drugs, like, might not be alive today.
Yeah.
You know, would you say that drugs in some ways, although like they cause this pain and these like external consequences, in some ways got you through a time that otherwise maybe not, or is that a far leap?
I mean, for me, I'm not willing to give drugs that much credit. I think there was definitely like a time where if I hadn't kept having drugs, I wouldn't have known how to go on. But
Right.
I think if I hadn't gotten drugs in the first place, it would be a very different situation. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it would be a totally different life. So it's hard to say.
Which is hard to say, especially starting to use so young. Like,
I've heard people say that before.
Yeah,
that,
no,
that
I
drugs saved my life. It was either kill myself
Yeah.
or medicate, and I medicated, and it's the only reason I'm still alive. If I didn't have that, I would have taken the alternative.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. It's not the first time I would have heard that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say that like just for my physical pain myself, but I have, close friends that I know would identify with that just emotionally speaking. But, it's different for everybody. And that's not to say that, like, I don't know. We all have these different experiences around them. And, like, obviously there's points where, whether we had problematic substance use at a time or if it wasn't problematic, like we used drugs because they were fun and they felt good
Yeah.
at times,
Yeah.
At least that's how it starts.
Yeah.
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 For sure.
And things become problematic for some of us and, but not always, not for all of us. But, it did for me, it seems like most of us sitting at this table. But, you accredit your parents to a lot of that, helping you through. How did they view your substance use? And, would you maybe look to the way that you practiced or were able to access like harm reduction in your process of getting to the point where you are today in recovery?
Yeah. I definitely, my parents kept me alive when I wasn't able to keep myself alive. I think beyond that, they definitely weren't like, they did their best to learn about addiction in a real way. They weren't like the most punitive. They definitely didn't like throw me out on the street when I was using. I always had options of somewhere to go. It wasn't always like stay with them or have a place they support, but I always had options of somewhere to go. I know I didn't really realize what a blessing that was until after this most recent treatment, where I've not stayed sober 100% of the time since then. The last few months I have, but my friend ended up starting to use heroin again, or fentanyl, basically, and he went through all his money, sold all his stuff, and ended up coming out of it, starting to go through withdrawal, and he didn't have his family there. Like his family basically just was done with him.
Right.
And he felt like he didn't have any options left, and he killed himself.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, he shot himself in the face. It was brutal.
Was that
It's
recent?
terrible.
Yeah, that was like 6 months ago.
Oh, that's fresh.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's when I really started to realize like a lot of parents will just throw you away on this stuff, and started to try to appreciate my parents more. Everyone in treatment was always wowed by how much my parents had tolerated. And I think at this point I am too, and I'm really trying to be a better person. But yeah, I credit a lot of my survival to them. They don't really have a lot of answers on like how to live right that really work for me, but definitely in terms of harm reduction, they really helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're okay with me like disclosing this, and if not, we can just edit it out. But I can recall a time where your mom drove you to syringe exchange.
Yep.
Which, like, a lot of parents and people that go to like Al-Anon and all these like that's like the exact opposite, you know, of
They
what
call
they're
it
told
enabling.
to do. It's called enabling. It's, you know, you need to cut ties, all of this shit.
Tough love.
Yeah. And people die because of it. And
Yeah.
like on an occasion it works, and maybe things were different before fentanyl. And, you know, I don't personally think that that's the best stance to ever take, but at the point we're at today, like, it is a life and death thing with fentanyl. And I've always like respected that a lot about your mom. And, you know, I think in that way you were pretty fortunate to have that kind of support and like understanding, you know, like, cause your mom's like of another generation, you know, that, in a lot of ways, like, that's a far out thing for probably a lot of people in her generation, I would think, and in both of your parents' generation.
Yeah, definitely. I know that definitely over the years, my parents have lost friends over keeping me around. They've really just, you know, didn't want me to die, and they really changed their lives so I could like survive. And, you know, I don't know how. I mean, I think a lot of things they did were like enabling in a way. I don't know. I don't know if I'm at a point in my recovery where I can like really be like, I don't want to be like, you know, they were enabling me or I would have gotten better. I think it's honestly more like they were enabling me or I likely would be dead.
Right.
Yeah. No, my story is a lot like yours. My dad paid $30,000 for me to go to treatment, but before that, I put them through hell, and they should have ousted me. I should have been kicked to the curb, but they love you, they love me, and they didn't give up. And then, but when the time came when I was ready for help, and my dad said, "Do you want it?" and I finally said yes and was serious about it, he put up the money and sent me to a treatment center. And without my parents, I say, yeah, they did enable me. Well, I'd hit them up for money, they gave me money and all that kind of stuff.
Me too.
Sure, you could look at that as enabling, but
what might you have done to get that money otherwise? You know,
I probably would have stole my mom's wedding ring or something instead.
Yeah.
Okay, you ain't gonna give me the money, then I'm taking this ring. You know, I've done that. You know, I've seen me do it. I know I'll do it again.
Yeah.
But yeah, sure, it is kind of enabling, but it's your parents. They love you and they don't want anything bad to happen to you. And when the time came, they were there for me at the worst.
Yeah.
When I was ready to take that next step.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man, that's I can relate 100% to what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to sort of recognize. Like, definitely, like as a man or as an adult human being in general. Like I mean, for a lot of my adulthood, I was in a dark place where I really like could not take care of myself, and I was, you know, months of recovery away from even remotely being able to function as a human being. And I think, I mean, I can't blame the parents that are just like see that situation and they're just like, I did my best, like, goodbye.
Right.
I can't say I would do any different in that situation than that, but yeah, I mean, my parents definitely did, and I'm doing my best to, you know, live my life in light of that and be grateful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't begin to, like, I'm not a parent, so imagine, like, what I would do in that scenario. I'd like to think I would do something similar. I'd say that, but I can't speak on something that I don't know.
I mean, I'd imagine it's tough, man.
Yeah,
it's
it
tough,
has to be.
you
But
know?
it's like it's really an illustration of, like, what harm reduction is and what it's about. And, like, I think that you probably had a relationship with your parents, even if there were, like, chaotic times where you could be more open and honest about what you were doing and what you were struggling with than most people can be with their parents or their guardians or whoever, you know, they're being taken care of by, just because there's, like, that, you know, regardless of whether, obviously they didn't like what was happening, what you were doing, but they were going to be there for you. And it was an approach that like allowed for an open dialogue and, support, which is what harm reduction and really is. It's just like helping you work towards, or helping whoever work towards the goals that they wanted to work towards, I don't know. I just think that that's admirable, and a lot of parents like don't have that concept. And I think even probably a lot of harm reductionists, like even in the role of a parent, might struggle to have that concept. And that's just because of the way like just society is and views drugs and drug users and the problem as a whole. And I don't know. It sounds like you're pretty lucky to like have such an understanding support network in that way.
Yeah, I think I am. I think that definitely like our society can get to a point where someone who's repeatedly fucking up and doing drugs just sort of stops being a human being.
Right.
And that's when it's okay to, stop helping them or just let them die or whatever. And my parents didn't do that, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of those consequences that we see with people who end up in problematic substance use, they're just compounded and snowballed by the stigma that they face and all the shit that comes with the stigma and societal perceptions. I think it just adds on to everything and doesn't end up helping anything. And an approach like you were given, if we could put that across the board, I think would go a long way.
Yeah.
And, it's cool to have an experience to be able to talk about, the way that can work. So I appreciate you coming on here, man. I think actually I'd like to have you on again at some point, because I feel like we could, discuss a lot of different areas and go a little further into it. But
yeah.
Hell yeah.
I think there's a lot that could be different avenues to go off a lot of what you said.
Yeah, I'd like to dissect some of it and, as they say in the podcasting, unpack a lot of it.
This hour went by quick, didn't it?
No,
yeah,
it really did.
This is a good one.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Thanks for coming, dude. I appreciate you, man. All right.